Oh, yeah. Okay, Connor, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, this is not the order I would normally take in an interview, but before we started, you were telling me something really interesting about why it is that you even want to do the work you're doing in the first place. And maybe it would be fun to start with that as a kind of way to ground our whole discussion.
Oh, that's really
Uh,
fun. Well,
so,
and
yeah, tell me
maybe
about that.
even before that, because I think it leads into this. I can talk about why I'm so excited to talk to you about this because I think that uh, maybe a lot of people who listen to you don't know who you are,
Well,
and
the only two people who listen to the show are my parents, who definitely do know who I
I definitely know you.
am. But sure.
So for context, for the people who are coming in and don't yet know of Joel's work, um, uh, I think the best place to start is to talk about how there is there's this world computer which is called Ethereum, and it allows you to like basically run programs on a bunch of other people's computers. And you've probably heard of Ether, which is the token. And uh, Ethereum was designed by this by a group of people, and one of them was this really brilliant engineer and game designer and communicator called Vitalik. Um, and Vitalik is quite famous for his ability to understand problems deeply and then solve them in technical ways. And one of the ideas, in addition to Ethereum, that Vitalik has contributed to is this idea called quadratic funding. And quadratic funding is this way to allow a group of people to fund things that they collectively benefit from. And so you can imagine if there was like a park down the street and we all benefit from this park, then one way to fund the park would be for Joel to go around to every single person and say, "Hey, could you donate to this?" And then we use the proceeds to support the park. Another way is that a government can say, "Hey, we have these funds. We'd like to spend them on public goods, like, for example, parks. If ever anyone donates to the park, then a little bit of those funds will also be spent on the park." So this is quadratic funding. I do not need to explain this to Joel because Joel has spent too much of his life already thinking about it. And this is where Joel comes into the story because the way that one of the problems that you can foresee with this is that let's imagine so with quadratic funding, the way that you allocate funding is if Joel donates $10, then you give a little bit of extra money because Joel donated. And if Connor donates $5, you also give a little bit of extra money because Connor donated. And when lots of different people donate to a thing, it gets them more money, which makes sense, right? Because there's more people benefiting. But this creates a sneaky problem for people who would like to run quadratic funding programs, which is that people can come along and they can create new accounts, and then they can use those, especially online. They can make like a new Twitter handle is really easy to create, and if you gave additional money for every different Twitter handle that somebody used to donate to something, you can imagine how problematic that would become. Because then I could go and I have my little park right by my house, and I'm the only one that uses it, but I make like a million different accounts and donate to a cause, and then I get tons of bonus money. And so this problem is called the Sybil problem, and many brilliant people have worked on the Sybil problem and tried to solve it. They try and identify the accounts, and they try to put up bounds on how much money can be stolen. And this is actually what Vitalik had done. Vitalik came up with this mechanism called Macy, and Macy basically just puts an upper limit on the amount of money that can be stolen by people who make fake accounts and then people who collude. And Joel's incredible contribution to the space is actually to supersede even what Vitalik had contributed with this mechanism called connection-oriented cluster match, COCM. And the brilliant idea inside of COCM is if we can know what things people care about, what groups they're a part of and what goods they benefit from, then we can actually use that information to weight the amount of funding that we give, that the government is allocating from this pool of funds. And this means that you don't have to know people's identities anymore. Instead, you just have to know people's interests and kind of the depth of their interests. And sometimes it's much easier to know people's interests and the depths of their interests than it is to know their identity, because they have all of this behavior that they've done on the internet. It's also important because probably we want to create worlds where you're able to support causes without giving away your identity, right? Without having to use your government issued passport or ID. And so this also permits pseudonymity. So this is who I get to talk to today. I get to hang out with Joel Miller, and that's why, and that leads right into the thing that we were talking about before this, which is that I've noticed that the thing that I find motivated by in life is doing things that the people that I respect. And what's cool about getting to spend time with you is that you are a person that I highly respect. So
wow,
this is an
thank
instance
you.
of that.
That was so many good things rolled into one. That was an answer to my question, foremost, an explanation of what COCM is, which I was dreading having to do at some point. So you got that out of the way for the show. Yes, and plenty of compliments for me, which I also appreciate, so thank you. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to think about, like, it's not that you would be... There's kind of this interplay between wanting to be liked by the community that you're a part of and the actual material things that you're doing, right? Because if the friends that you had were, instead of being really into like creating new fun social technologies, which is what you do, right? That's the area that you want to succeed in. If you had friends that were really into, I don't know, building 3D printed guns to go rob banks with or something, well, that actually starts to sound kind of fun. If they were into like something really like lame, like, I don't know, giving diseases to like birds.
You heard it here first. Joel is starting a 3D printed gang.
If you were friends with a bunch of people that were into that, giving diseases to like endangered animals or something, right? Like, you actually wouldn't care about their approval anymore, I'm guessing, right? And that wouldn't actually direct the work that you're doing. So there's kind of, it feels to me like there's multiple different ways to see it, and there's really this interplay between what your friends like and what's really good for the world and what you might want to do. But I think that way of framing it, of choosing to pay more attention to the community that you're a part of, is a really good way to kind of ground the work and give yourself some what's the word? Some good perspective, I think, because like I know for me it can be really anxiety inducing sometimes to get caught up in an obsession with the material markers of what has happened, right? Like, has my algorithm done this or that? Has this person adopted it? Have they tweeted about it, right? Has my boss said that it's good or bad, whatever, right? Have the investors,
Are these actual things that you feel? Actual instances?
Kind of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess for me, most of my anxiety these days is actually about academia and not my work with COCM, although they're tied up together. But sure, has my paper been accepted? Whatever you want, right? And framing it in terms of the relationships that you have with people instead, I feel like is a much more natural, humanistic way to like think about doing work,
I do think it's more stable. Yeah. So one of the things that you talked about was, well, let's see, is it? I think that maybe what it is it's a leading indicator. So if the people that I respect think what I'm doing is making sense, then it's a sign for me that, okay, I'm not totally insane. And actually, those other things matter to me, like the number of users that I have in the things that I'm building, the amount of money that flows through the systems that I build, the projects that have been funded by it, and the impact that it has had. The amount of money that I make, right? Like how sustainably funded am I, and are the people that I get to work with? All of these are things that matter to me immensely. And I don't want to discount them because I'm super motivated by them as well. And I think even like one of the things I'm working through as well is finding out how to be motivated by material success in ways that still feel like they matter, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I do think that we live inside of this game where those sorts of things matter, where people like if you have the markers of social status, then you also have the ability to kind of like direct kind of like what is considered beneficial and interesting and worth paying attention to. And I want to live in a world where we pay attention to the things that I think are beneficial and interesting and so on. And I think that we are sort of like entering into a new era where like that area of interest can kind of grow. It can be a little bit broader. I'm also sensitive to the fact that like the things that I think are worth allocating status and attention and whatnot for might not be they're definitely not the whole story. And so doing that within the recognition of my limited view. But all of that to say, this game of like figure out like what the people that I respect make things that the people that I respect, I think is a good start. I have something I notice about a weakness of it, and then maybe we could also talk about, and then we can start to move on to the other things that we initially had hoped to have this conversation for.
Sure, yeah.
Which was a weakness of doing something that the people that you respect, is that you can sometimes end up creating these really insular communities where that then like excludes people who don't have the ability to play that game, right? It's like not everybody is going to be designing cool game theoretic mechanisms like you are.
Right. They're
going to have like other skills and things that they can contribute, or maybe they don't even have something to contribute to like this like shared mission that we have. And so in addition to like doing things that the people that I respect, I also think there's work to do, which is to increase the scope of people that you respect.
Totally.
And like how do we include as many people? How do I work to respect even those people that I don't have a high view of? I can tell there's something on your tongue, but I have an example of this. Do you have something you were gonna?
I would rather let you talk and then say my piece.
Okay. So an example of this, one of my favorite examples of this, is in when I was in my like mid-20s. I found the Flat Earth meetup group in Colorado Springs, and really did not respect flat earthers, obviously. and was like um, was like terrified of them. I was genuinely scared of them. I thought that they were insane.
Okay.
And the first day that I met them, I wouldn't give my phone number out to them because I was like, this idea that there was somebody in the world who believed that the Earth was flat was like, seemed to me like it would be correlated with all sorts of other dangerous behaviors.
Yeah.
And then, fast forward 2 years later, I was like a religious attendee of the Flat Earth Meetup group. I think I went like every Tuesday for over 2 years. And got to know the people and got to like meet some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met in my life are flat earthers.
Really?
I think it requires a certain amount of brilliance to kind of maintain that structure and keep it alive in your head and in your life.
Right, like the amount of mental effort that you need to spend. I mean, I should say, maybe for the listeners at home, do you believe that the Earth is flat or not? That's important context.
No, I think we should leave it ambiguous. We should let them sit with the possibility, with both possibilities about my
Gotcha.
identity.
Well, okay. Sure. Well, that's fine then. Leaving that aside, you're trying to say that because regardless of whether or not the Earth really is flat or not, the fact that the whole world tells you that the Earth is round means that you need to, if you do believe the Earth is flat, there's some serious mental energy that you're going to need to expend in maintaining that belief. And is that what you kind of mean by brilliant?
Yeah, there's mental energy, but then it also requires just like a ton of knowledge of, like a ton of fact recall, a ton of knowledge of like generalized science. So I would say that their science literacy was way higher than the average person. And I used to test this by like asking simple questions that a flat earther can immediately answer with like the answer that a globe head, as they call the people that believe that the Earth is round, that a globe head would give, but that when you ask an average person, they can't answer it. So an example of this is if there's a helicopter in Dallas, Texas, that lifts off the ground, and then it hovers there for 12 hours, and then it comes back down. Why does it not come back down in the middle of Africa? Like on the other side of the planet. Why does it come down in Austin again?
Oh, you're asking me?
You can give the answer. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That kind of reminds me of those experiments where you have a moving train car and you throw a ball up in the air from the car and it comes back down in the train car, right? It's like conservation of momentum, something like that.
This is not exactly the answer.
Okay. By the way, wait.
It's close.
Wouldn't well, I'll let you go. I feel like the fact that it does happen the way it happens gives credence to the idea that the Earth is round, doesn't it? Like that the Earth is rotating.
They would say that that's consistent with the Earth being flat because you go up, you wait for 12 hours, and then you come down, and you come down in the same place. And they would say if the Earth is rotating, you go up, the Earth should rotate under you, and then you should land on the other side of the planet. Why don't you?
Well, I guess we've got one more flat earther in the world now because I'm stumped.
It's great, right? Like these are, and these are beautiful puzzles, and like fun knowledge of science in the world that they have ready on hand, and not only about these sorts of things, and about like the atmosphere. Like I learned with them that the atmosphere recently by NASA was they established that the edge of the Earth's atmosphere is actually outside of the moon's orbit. There's like still apparently some degree of increased density of atmosphere out there compared to like space. all sorts of fun and interesting things that they happen to know. But not only like object level stuff, but also epistemology level stuff. Like their like metascience, or they're like the science of science, like what makes something science and how do we come to believe things, is really also very good. And so their knowledge of logic and like logical inference rules, their knowledge of like a theory and how a theory is established, and the fact that you never prove something, you only ever disprove hypotheses. It's really beautiful. Like it's really it made for extremely stimulating and interesting conversation, which is not something I would have expected going into it. So this is an example, I think, of an instance where growing. Another way to say this is that I really respect them, and I care what they think about me. Like I want their respect as well, because they are also, although we disagree on like this thing, we agree on kind of like the like universe of things that sit outside of it.
Right.
Like how do we come to form beliefs, and like what counts as good evidence, and
Sure.
and so
And there's something about the difference that's important, right? Like the fact that you don't agree on the shape of the Earth is actually what opens up all these new possibilities for new combinations and new, ways of thinking and learning new science facts and all of that stuff.
yeah, learned so much about light refraction through air, and because one of the experiments that you want to do is you want to measure basically your line of sight over bodies of water, because bodies of water are flat, right? And if we're on if we're on a sphere, then if you're standing here on the sphere and you look out, you should only be able to see so far before like you see the horizon. Whereas if you're on something flat, you should be able to see, much much further. And they have these instances where you can see buildings, kind of like I think it was the Chicago skyline. You can see the ground of the Chicago skyline from like way too far out, from beyond the 8-mile limit or whatever. And so the question is like, why is that? Why is that possible?
And is it light refraction over bodies of water? Is that the answer?
Yeah, and basically like light refracts through the cool air that's on the surface of the water. Is it the cool air or the warm air? And I think it's the cool air. And then that allows you to like, it takes the building, which is like this tall, and then it kind of foreshortens it, but you can still see the ground. It's like it gets squished.
Gotcha.
And so you're able to see something you shouldn't be able to see on a round Earth if there wasn't a lensing effect, if there wasn't refraction.
Right, yeah. All right. I'm going to use my host powers to draw us back towards the main meat of the show, although this is pretty interesting.
Although I think that this is like, this is a instance of the broader pattern that we're going to talk about. We're about to talk about collective sense-making and decision-making tools. We're about to talk about like how do we design systems of sense-making and funding and capital allocation, and from my perspective, this little instance is a just like a little leaf on the fern.
Sure.
But that's self-similar with the broader question.
Definitely, yeah. So, what launched us into the flat Earth example was you talking about wanting to be respected by your peers, but also finding that sometimes these kind of peer-based notions of sense-making, deciding what's important, etc., right, can become too insular, right? Mm-hmm. And actually, one other thing I want to bring up is that, like, you could think of, money as this very, very non-insular way of deciding what's important, in the sense that, you know, pretty much, I mean, there are limits to this, but money, having a lot of money, gives you very broad reach to kind of say what's important or tip the scales in certain ways, no matter what community you're a part of. So, right, so money is kind of this tool for deciding what's important that really respects the boundaries of communities very, very little, right? So I think what's interesting about some of your projects is that they represent ways of kind of deciding on what's important that maybe borrow a little bit from the idea of money, but don't totally embrace it. So maybe with that, can you just very briefly kind of explain for the people at home what do you actually do? Why are you here? 28 minutes into the recording of the show. What's happening?
Explaining what I do is my ultimate curse, especially when trying to tell my mother for the 10th time. She's like, "Can you just write it down for me so that I can like tell other people because because I always forget." But what I'm really interested in are designing systems of incentives so that it's only profitable for companies to do good, and tools for communities to define for themselves what counts as good. And so what I really believe is that the problems that we face in the world today, and we have many of them, the what some people call the meta crisis, but what definitely we can like point to and we can say, okay, we have like global coordination challenges, and then we seem to be breaking out into war, and there's like threat of nuclear self-annihilation, and there are climate threats, and I lost your audio, but that must be intentional.
Yeah, I was just needed to cough. Yeah,
and there are climate threats, and there are the list goes on that. All of these are not a result of nefarious actors, per se. They're not a result of a plot to get us into this situation, but actually they're a result of the fact that we don't have better games to play, and that we're all behaving in this way because this is like the optimal way, given our fear, for us to behave on a global scale. And that maybe it need not be this way. That maybe there are other better games to play. And my question is, and by games I really just mean like, how do we set up environments where we all agree to new rules, and those new rules produce beneficial outcomes? And the reason it's fun to talk about them as games is because we're used to this, right? We understand that like baseball is a set of a whole bunch of constraints on what people can do. You can only hit the ball with your bat, and the pitcher must stand on the pitching mound, and you have to do it inside of this you have to hit the ball inside of this little invisible box, which is sitting in front of you, and there's somebody that sits behind you and like checks whether the ball was within the box, right? All of these like arbitrary rules, but then it produces this symphony of interesting dynamics that are really entertaining to watch. And if we can do that with games, then maybe we can also do that with the game, the broader game that we're all playing together. And so that's really my question, my obsession, my curiosity, and what I'm engaged in the world is finding some of those new games that have the sorts of dynamics that we're looking for. Games that will let us make sense of the world better. What is going on and what should we do about it, and games that allow us to coordinate to then take those actions.
Totally, yeah. And what kind of form do those games or questions kind of specifically manifest as?
Yeah, good question. So, well, what I'm really excited about is that we live in a world where we're able to we live in a world where we're able to put the rules that we want to follow inside of a system that is outside of a person who can tamper with it. And that's really hopeful, because it means that we can set up these new game environments that don't allow for anyone to, sort of like go through your mail before it gets delivered. There used to be mail rooms, and when you would send off your mail to somebody else, you always had to wonder, like, okay, it was going through all these different people's hands. How do you ensure that it gets to the destination that you intended and it gets there without anyone looking through? And now, when you send an email, you well, with people with the NSA, maybe you do worry about this, but now when you send an email, there's no hands that it's actually passing through, so you don't have to worry about people sliding open the envelope and looking inside.
This is the hope, at least.
This is the hope, yeah. And so this is something that this is something I'm excited about for the era that we get to live in. Is that
Gotcha.
We get to make these new games, these new game dynamics, and we get to implement them in software, and or at least parts of them in software, and then we get to live under the dynamics that they create, because we all opted into playing this new game.
Totally, yeah. So that's important, and this is one of the things that makes you such a good guest for the show, is that really there's this social aspect to your work. You've mentioned a lot of social problems and socially kind of managed solutions, right? In other words, solutions that are the result of people figuring stuff out collectively rather than, I don't know, plugging things into an algorithm or throwing dice randomly or something like that, right? But at the same time...
Although don't undervalue random decision making. I think sortition and these sorts of things are undervalued.
Sure. In any case, there's a social component, right? And at the same time, the kind of tool that I see you using the most to kind of, implement these things is technology, right? So we've worked together on a project called Index Wallets, which is like a very kind of technologically driven plan for, I don't know how you would say it, managing different types of influence. There's also a project...
Public goods funding, maybe?
Sure. So these are projects that have, I think at their core, like a technological implementation. And I think that you're such a good guest for this show because you are the only person that I know, who has had an idea for a social technology that could change the world, and who has actually gone out and gotten money to do it. So it's so easy to sit here and think, if we use this algorithm, that might be better. If we use this thing, whatever, we should do this, we should do that. You're actually doing the work of going and talking to people who have money, getting them to give you money, and then using that money to create prototypes, to run tests, to try to figure things out. So I would love to get your broad thoughts maybe first, and then we can double click on things if we want. But just broadly, what is that like? And what is it like to pitch something to, what I'm assuming is, a capitalist, broadly not using that term in this case, not using that term pejoratively, but literally, somebody who owns capital and is interested in ostensibly using that capital to make more money, right? What is it like to talk to them and say, hey, I have this idea for a social technology, can you help me fund it?
Well, you catch me at a really interesting moment to ask this question because I just got an offer for a $1.2 million check for the Network Goods Institute.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we also just turned it down.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And we turned it down for well, so we went through the whole process of fundraising from venture. And so for context for people who aren't familiar, venture capital is a kind of capital that seeks extreme returns. A success for them is that you provide a 10x return in a 5 to 10 year timeline on their investment. And that probably means there have been multiple investments along the way. And so it's not just their investment, but many people's investments that you have to return 10x for. And they are willing to put up with lots of failures in exchange for one extreme success. And the way that it works is that they give you a certain amount of money up front. They take some ownership of the company. And in our case, because we're doing something in crypto, of the tokens. And then you go and you build the business, and then eventually they hope that you will return the money to a significant degree. And so we went through the entire process of fundraising. I was just in Thailand closing up our round, which is where we got the lead funder. And it took about 3 or 4 months to go through the entire process from beginning to end. I mean, it was something that I had been thinking about and kind of like loosely pursuing for about a year before that. But then about 3 or 4 months ago, I was like, okay, we either have to do it or we have to stop doing it, because fundraising is a really time-consuming process. And the reason that we could pursue venture funding is because in both of the projects that we're working on, there's a significant opportunity for really big outcomes. And those outcomes come from the projects that we'll talk about are index wallets and negation game. And among them, there's about 3 ways that you can make a ton of money. And there are known businesses out there that make $18 billion a year in profit, for example, off of something that is similar to index wallets. And so really large market opportunities. But so that's why it's possible to pursue venture. And I actually think that this is important. Like, one of the things that I think a lot of people who are kind of on the, what do I want to call it? Kind of like the granola side of the aisle, feel that making money is really bad. And I want to like put in a little plug for money, which is that it's extremely beautiful that it's possible to create something that's so valuable that someone is willing to part ways with this optionality that they have, that they could go and use on anything else, for that one thing that you have created. And so the fact that I walk into the grocery store and I spend the money on the strawberries, and it's painful for me to spend the money on those strawberries, because of course I don't want to have to spend the $2.68 or whatever it is for that. Probably it's much more now for that little plastic box. But the fact that I'm willing to do that is a sign. It's a in the language of game theory, it's a sincere signal of the fact that I prefer it. And what a beautiful system to build around this sincere signal of preference. And so if you live in a world where where you're making a whole bunch of of money because people are willing to part ways with it in exchange for the thing that you've created, then that is evidence to you, really solid evidence that you've created something that's valuable, which is, of course, I think, a noble goal. Of course, the ways in which it can fail are also numerous, and they fail for the same reason. When somebody's addicted to cigarettes, they're buying no longer because it's a sincere signal that it's something that they want, but they're buying because they have a physiological addiction and they can't stop. And so that property, that beautiful property that we love, which is that it's a sincere signal of preference, breaks down, and it's in those cases that we should be worried about the ways in which money and markets and capital might misbehave. But I think that part of part of the trajectory that's available to us as humanity is to fold in both a appreciation for money and the game that it sets up and the value that it provides, and then also an appreciation for its limitations and like the ways in which the game fails, because for some reason there are sides to this, right? For some reason there are people who are like pro markets, and there are people who are like anti markets, and that seems really silly. It would be like being I don't know, like what's a good example? Maybe it's like the one that's coming to mind is like being pro or anti gutters. Like
Sure. Yeah.
I am pro gutters on the places where there's water to make flow away, but that doesn't mean that we should put them in my room, because we might not need them there. And so like understanding the role that it plays and like when to deploy it, I think allows us to kind of exit the game that we're in right now, which is like it's either good or it's bad, and enter a new game, which is like in what cases is it useful?
Totally.
And in the cases where it fails, what are alternatives?
Sure. And I want to get back to the story of why exactly you were offered this $1.2 million check, which you turned down. But first I need to ask, so you've given a great description of why money can sometimes be interesting and useful. In the design of index wallets, were you thinking to yourself, oh, well, I know that I'm going to try to get fundraising from venture capitalists eventually, so I'll try to give my social technology idea this component, this kind of side effect where actually also you can make a bunch of money from it? Or is it the case that like the kind of idea for index wallets emerged more quote-unquote purely without such a concern, and then you realized, oh, well, hey, because of this extra property, I can also talk to venture about this?
Yeah, beautiful. So in both cases, both for index wallets and negation game, I was unclear.
Which I should say is the other project that you work on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In both of them, we were unclear as to whether or not this would be this could have like a revenue stream, and if it could have a revenue stream, if it could be lucrative. In both cases, it was like really uncertain, and it was actually important that as we pursued it, that we remained sort of open to it not being able to be self-sustaining, and that comfort, right? Giving ourselves a time. It's been over a decade that I've been in the idea maze, kind of like searching. And it's been about 2 years that we've really been working on this with some degree of earnest, and now we're really going to kick into gear. For all of that time, there was really a comfort with the possibility that maybe this won't be sustainable. And I can give a specific example. So let me like explain what index wallets are really fast, and then tell you what the revenue model is, and I'll do the same for negation game. So index wallets are a payment method, just like you would pay with a Visa card, where you pay with multiple currencies at once instead of just one. And actually the constraint is that you always have to pay with multiple currencies. You can never, if you have a little bit of US dollars in your account, you have to spend those US dollars when you go to a store, even if even if that store is in Europe, right? If they're accepting index payments, they're receiving those U.S. dollars. And the same is true if you were to be buying something here in the States and you have a little bit of euros in your account. If they're in your account, you have to spend them, and you'll spend them in proportion to the amount of the currency that you have there. And what you can do with this, the dynamics that this creates, is that you can fund public goods in this new way. And more or less the way that it works is that somebody has a project that they want to work on. They issue a new currency. You can donate to get a little bit of that currency. That currency is included in your wallet. And then through kind of the magic of the incentive environment that Index Wallets sets up, there's an incentive for local businesses to value your currency, because especially if lots of you in the community have that currency, because if they value it, it will seem cheaper for you to buy from them than it will to buy from their competitors. And so just through selfish incentives, they have a reason to value this currency, and by valuing the currency, they're funding the public good that it supports, and offsetting the donation cost that you gave. So you donated $10, and now when you go and spend with them, they value that currency that's in your wallet for a little bit. Maybe in total now you've only donated $9 to that project. The other $1 is something that they are carrying, and they're carrying it because they want to attract you as a customer. So this is Index Wallets in a nutshell. It's incredibly simple idea, and there's so much I could say about it. I'll spare you. We're in the process of putting together a write-up on it that maybe will answer the questions that might be coming up. And the revenue model for this, there's two potential revenue models. The first is to do the Visa thing. Visa charges a 4% transaction fee, and that's where they get their $18 billion in profits a year. And so if you have a lot of people that adopt this payment method, then there's a lot of potential revenue there. My preferred revenue model is actually not to take a percentage of transaction fees. Instead, try and leave that as close to zero as possible. But instead there will also be a transaction fee that's charged by the processor, right? So if you're running this on a sequencer of some sort that's like doing these transactions for you, then they're going to have to charge a little fee too. So you probably want to but I say run as close as you can to gas costs there. Instead, I think a really cool revenue model is you take a percentage. So the Index Wallets network takes a percentage of the minted currencies. And so that means that our revenue model comes from the amount of funding for public goods that's created. And so if it's if we take 4% of all of the public goods funding tokens, then that could be not only super values aligned and super incentive aligned, but also potentially extremely lucrative. So that's the business model there. But you can see how if we were focused on finding a revenue model in the early days for something like this, then we would have maybe reached for something too soon. But by waiting until we understood the dynamics of the whole system and the benefit that it was providing, it became super clear what the opportunities were to make this self-sustaining.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's Index Wallets, and that's the path to finding the revenue model for that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the point was not, in other words, to say, I would like to be the new Visa, and then how do I design a social technology around that? It was a natural thing, and from what it sounds like, turning down this $1.2 million check, chasing the next paycheck is not potentially your main concern, unless you're about to tell me that you turned down the 1.2 million because somebody else offered
I took the
5 million or something. So why don't you tell our listeners and me about the specifics there, if you feel comfortable doing so. I know of course this is something that just happened. There are people in your life that you might be about to talk about, so please say only what you're comfortable with saying. But
totally free. We're totally free to talk about it. Uh, um, we just made the decision last week, and I have a collaborator, co-founder, co-creator, brilliant engineer partner, Voki, who I get to work with this on, and Voki and I had a call. Voki is pseudonymous, and so this is his pseudonym. Voki and I had a call where we just said, okay, actually, he just said, okay, if I was to make the choice right now about what we did, I would have us turn down the money. And we would go and pursue grants instead. And I really needed him to say that, because I had spent so much effort and energy and life force in getting to that point where we had the deal on the table. Hundreds of VC calls. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Probably about 100 though, VC calls, and 3 months of really hard work. The most extreme stress I've ever had in my life was a week before I had announced that the round was going to close, and then we did not have a lead at the time when I announced that the round was going to close, which is not the way you typically do this. And then, like, in that final week, I was basically asking people to make the deal. And it was like physically, it felt like there was a laser that had been burnt across my heart and my stomach.
Wow.
Like a level of stress that I've never had before. And in the end, we got the offer. It was a really generous offer. We were going to give up about 10% of the company and about 5% of the tokens for $1.5 million in total once everybody's money had come in. And that was, or 1.2 million, but it would have been 1.5 at the end. That was about a $24 million valuation. So the company, or the network itself, would have been valued at 24 million. The company would have been valued at 12 million. And so for both of us, this was like, a part of that choice was giving up our shares and our ownership in something that was, giving up the state of, at least on paper, having these extremely valuable shares and tokens, and then all of the freedom that the money was going to provide to hire people and to begin to build the network and so on. But so then, the question must be like, why did we choose to do that? And at its heart, we came to believe that we would struggle to build the next game, the next socioeconomic system, the next governance context, the new incentive environment on top of the old one. We came to believe that those old incentives, that they would find ways to reach up and to grab us inside of that new game, and that they would, because they were the thing that we had built on top of, that they would ultimately be what dictated, and we knew this. We didn't know this before we went through the fundraising process.
Yeah.
Before we went through the fundraising process, in your head you can say, okay, these are the things that I'm committed to, and like this is how I want to be in the world, and this is what I want to care about. But then you get in that environment and you notice what's happening to you. At least in my case, I noticed that I had this extreme difficulty being in integrity, so being like telling the story as it was, um, and I did not like that.
Yeah.
That was something that I noticed constantly. Was there's this constant pull for you to overstate the
Yes.
where you're at.
Yeah.
It was like it gave me an enormous sense of empathy for the Elizabeth Holmes and the Sam Bankman-Frieds of the world, because I can totally see how the thing that the game asks you to do, because the game does not care about what's actually going on. The
Right.
game of VC cares about what the other VCs think is going on, right?
Sure.
And so your job is not to do the thing that is substantive. Your job is to do the thing that everybody else thinks is substantive.
Right. Yeah.
And as long as you keep doing that, then you can just keep passing the buck. And actually, your ability to pass the buck is the thing that you are evaluated on.
Right. Yeah. So here's actually, speaking of communities and what communities value, right? Sounds like what you're identifying is you're saying, hey, here's this community that it sounds like maybe does actually have a pretty serious amount of insularity. And all of a sudden you enter this world where, kind of generating buzz within this one insular community is contributing to stress. It's getting you to bend the truth a little, or maybe in Elizabeth Holmes's case, a lot, right? And it sounds like, yeah, that's something that you were noticing. And it's so funny because, what I would imagine is, hey, you're coming in and saying, we could be the next Visa, a percentage of the money that we generate or a percentage of the tokens, whatever have you. Like, at first thought, I would imagine, like, shouldn't that be enough for a guy who just, not you, a guy, but like for a venture capitalist who just cares about money, But what it sounds like is that there's this such a strong social component that that other kind of considerations end up entering the picture, and it also sounds like you were worried about other asks of you besides just for some percentage, right? In your decision to turn down index wallets, it sounds like you were kind of saying to yourself, maybe, the incentives of the old game will bubble up in a more pernicious way than we were previously imagining. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's the discovery, is that I just found that in that game environment, because I like to win, right?
Yeah.
I like to win. And so the thing that won in that game environment required me to sort of transform into something that like now on the other side of that choice, I'm so grateful that I'm free from that.
Yeah.
But at the time, I wouldn't have said it was a problem. Like when we were planning on taking the money, I would have said, no, it's not an issue. I'm not affected by this. It's just on the other side when like the lightness has appeared. And to be clear, it's not all lightness. Like some part of me is very scared that I'm an idiot.
Right. Yeah.
That we should have taken the money. And not just some part of me. Like there is the question: how will we fund ourselves? How will I pay my how will I pay my my very expensive San Francisco rent when I'm out there next month? And how long can I do that for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, without a doubt, there's a sense of fear in this. It's not all freeing, but that lightness did come from the fact that on the other side of making that choice, it was like, okay, great, now we can focus on what matters instead of focusing on this hype game that just gets into your soul, and it requires, it asked of me to become the entrepreneur, the founder. It asked of me to be the CEO, to tell the compelling story, and to kind of like take my team and direct my team in the way that was going to be like as optically what do I want to call it? That was like optically acceptable. Because if you're not like optically acceptable, then you can't get funding for the next round. And so you need to, like, as much as possible, you're trying to like fit yourself into the shapes that the funders think that you should occupy. And like every good founder, of course, is aware of this, but then they're also bucking this trend in certain ways. I don't want to make it sound like I think VC is not good to pursue for anyone. But in our particular case, because of the thing that we're trying to create, which in many ways is an alternative to VC, that's what the negation game is. Because of the thing that we were trying to create, we were worried about having our own foundation still be in the old game.
Sure. Yeah.
Because of the ways it might leak into the new one.
Gotcha. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, kind of what I was hoping for. Sorry, I'm going to cough 1 second, mute my mic. Excuse me. I was hoping for a world where maybe you were able to say, let's take the money and run, right? But it sounds like it's not so simple. Well,
interesting. Why were you hoping for that?
Oh, because it would be cool. It would be like, robbing a bank with a 3D printed gun or something,
Say more.
Well, I mean, the truth is it comes from a very selfish place of thinking that you deserve a lot of money and that venture capitalists don't deserve to have a say in what you do. And if there were a way to establish, both of those realities at once, I would be in favor of that. But, that's not the rules of the game, as we've been saying. Yeah.
Well, so in defense of the people in venture and the venture capitalists, I think really highly of them. I think that at least the people, there's only one person that I did not think highly of all of the funders that I met with. And I met with many of them. And I found them to be extremely oriented towards building things that would work, really pragmatic, deeply knowledgeable about like a whole array of things, because they have to be knowledgeable about everything from like product to economics and game theory and macro and micro market cycles and regulations, and so I really did think highly of them. In particular, the funder that we got to work with, Blue Yard, is not only do I love the people who work there, and in particular love Chad and Mariola and Kieran, who were some key people that we worked with, but they're also super values aligned, and so they were the ones that gave us our first 100K to investigate index wallets, and to invalidate index wallets, to find that index wallets didn't work, which you also helped us on.
Yes. Yeah.
You helped us fail in that task. And so I actually have the opposite perspective, which I think really highly of all the people that are there. And so once again, I think that it's the game, I think that they are within a particular game context that require, like the way that you succeed in that game context is you behave a particular way. And Blue Yard in particular, I think, is pushing that game context to its very limits in terms of both succeeding really well as a fund, but also attracting a community of really talented builders who are values aligned, that are building kind of the new substrate for not only our global economic system, but also for other things like they do a lot of biofunding and whatnot. Sustainability, I think they might also do. So, I don't want to. I actually left. I left really impressed with venture capitalists as a class, and learned a lot from them. Like, I think the process, even though we're declining the kind of like typical fruits, the process of having, over 100 conversations with all these different people and having to refine the story such that it was something that they could understand, and like poking holes in it and like finding those areas that we really needed to work on.
Yeah.
Was super valuable.
It sounds like venture capitalists have a lot in common with flat earthers.
Venture capitalists and flat earthers.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression I'm getting.
Let's see.
In the sense that they challenge you and are actually very knowledgeable, despite having a certain reputation with some parts of the population.
Yeah, although I found also, maybe this isn't uniformly true, but I also found them to be less codicioso. What do you call it when you're in pursuit of money? I found them to be less
greedy?
In pursuit of money. Greedy, yeah. Than I had expected as well. So
gotcha. Yeah.
Anyway, that's my my public
your reflections. Yeah.
Yeah, it's my what's it called when you make a PSA, my public service announcement on behalf of venture capitalists as a class. We should have more of them.
Okay, well, we are at a little bit over an hour, which seems like a healthy length for a show. I'm out of questions. You've explained everything that I was curious about beautifully. Do you have anything else that you want to say about social technology and getting stuff done in the real world before you leave?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm wondering if you would be down to go another 30 minutes, because I think we have more.
I think we can go as long as we have things to talk about.
We have energy? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Because what comes to mind, a couple things come to mind. Yeah, I think what I feel excited about talking about is why I think the negation game is a kind of capital allocation funding mechanism that doesn't fall prey to these same weaknesses of venture capital.
Okay, sure.
Because I think that especially now that I'm on the other side of having played that game, I know firsthand how the main effect that VC has on you is it kind of tries to narrow your perspective, to simplify your story, to express maximum confidence. Always, you have to be expressing maximum confidence, not doubt. Otherwise, you lose people. And to be in competition with others, right? So you have there's other companies that are doing similar things or working towards a similar goal, but you are all in zero-sum competition with one another, and so then you end up developing very separate platforms and ecosystems that definitely do not play nicely with one another, because you don't want, if you're Facebook, you really don't want people to also be posting on Twitter. If you're Twitter, you don't want them to be posting on Substack, and so you create these walled gardens as well, and so all of that emerges from the underlying game environment of VC. The underlying game environment of you have an entity which is called a company, and then that company goes out and it creates it has its users and its community and its network and its platform, and the value accrues to those things, and anyone who's in an adjacent space, maybe they're working towards or they claim to be working towards a similar goal, those are competitors. They are not allies, right? And so that need to be that like overconfidence and almost like an aversion to outside information or to negative information, and the like zero sumness. Zero sum is the game theory term, just meaning that we're in competition with others, and that every time you get something, I lose something. So kind of like the competitiveness. To me, those also feel very reminiscent of also the more fundamental problems that we're facing right now as a species, as a planet. Is that it feels very zero sum, and constantly we are closing ourselves off to information that is potentially harmful, that is potentially negative information to the self or to the ideology that we belong to the group that we belong to, and we're expressing extreme confidence that our approach is good. Because if to be doubtful for even a moment is to cede ground, right? Is to give up ground to those people who are more sure of themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, is China's system or is the United States' system the better system? Well, if you're in China, then you know the answer, and you know it very confidently. If you're in the United States, you know the answer, and you know it very confidently. And in fact, just the mere existence of something so different is a threat, and we should start building up our naval capacity as a result.
Right.
And so this is like I think it's reminiscent of the broader game. The game of VC is you have your territory, you have your named entity, and then you're fighting over the available land. And the way that and I want to be clear that VC is not the thing that's causing those problems in the world. Those problems arise from different things, but they arise from, I think, the same fundamental dynamics, which is this like need for overconfidence, this zero sumness, and then ultimately like this like fear of loss that comes from that. Does that make sense? Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the negation game, and how does it try to solve some of these problems?
Okay. So the core idea of the negation game is that we're creating a funding environment, capital allocation environment. So if you have a project, for example, you can take it into the negation game and get funded from it. But it is a funding environment that gives you more influence, gives you more funding, gives you a higher price to your assets as you make statements about how you can find out that you're wrong.
Okay. Yeah. So it's somehow encouraging people to have humility with a monetary incentive.
That's right. You're getting more influence in this game, both more influence for the things that you want to enact. So like if you think that if you think a particular law or rule should be passed, you get more influence by saying the ways in which you would change your mind, what would be surprising or what would be information to you. And then if you have a project that you're working on, let's say that you're working on a biotech project, and you are, you're exploring a particular, maybe you are exploring a method of using a a I was gonna try and describe CRISPR obliquely, but then I realized I don't actually know how to describe CRISPR obliquely.
Yeah.
But maybe you're like one of the early people working on CRISPR, and you think that there's this possibility of creating this really powerful and novel technique for cutting DNA, splicing DNA. Then you get more influence in exchange for, and more funding in exchange for making statements about how you could find out that you're wrong about this approach, right? Which is, of course, the heart of the scientific method. The heart of scientific method, what makes something science is that it is falsifiable. And so really all that we've done is we've found this way, this mechanism, this game that you can play that gives additional influence to people who are who make statements about what, in what ways could their cherished beliefs be proven wrong.
Sure, yeah. So this is some kind of way of essentially encouraging people to get out of this, I'm right, I can't be challenged mindset.
Or, that's
or,
right. Or to get those people who are right and they can't be challenged out of the influence, out of the pool of influence, right?
Sure. Yeah.
In this world, those people who are just committed to their particular perspective of the world, because of this mechanism, they'll just tend not to have very much voice.
Right.
And
so having a little bit of ideological flexibility, right, is what's going to help you succeed. In other words, being the type of person who's willing to go to the flat earther meeting, right? Or, etc.
That's right. I built it to empower myself. In some sense, of course, this is true. Or another way to say it is that I behaved as the way I behaved because that's what I believed should be empowered.
I mean, it's so funny, right? Like, you do need to think that you're right to kind of do anything in the world, right? Like, you do need to think, I have a good idea that deserves attention, right?
Do you think so?
That's a great question. Maybe it's not true. I think that, if I was a completely, enlightened person, I wouldn't need that motivation. But I'm not there yet, I think for me...
Go ahead.
For me, it definitely is motivating to think that, my ego is connected to something worth doing. Yeah.
Yes. That's true for me too. I feel that too. I really want to do something that's worth doing. And actually, by being in that context where I'm always asking the question, is this something worth doing? And I'm kind of taking the ideas and I'm bringing them to others and I'm saying, hey, what do you think of this? Once again, back to that, the people that I respect, do they respect this? But also publicly saying, here's the ways in which I could find out that I'm wrong. Please help me be wrong. There's a bounty that I put out to if anyone can help me find out that I'm wrong about index wallets, right? In the early days of index wallets, so when we got that funding for Blue Yard, we held invalidation sessions where we actually invited a whole bunch of people. We presented index wallets to them, and then enabled them to offer their critiques. And I have to tell you that that was the most emotionally draining experience maybe of my life.
Sure.
Inviting in all taking this thing that I so loved and had carefully kind of nurtured for such a long time, and then presenting it in front of people who I really respect and saying, hey, in what ways do you think that this might be a really bad idea? That was terrifying.
I feel that way a lot when I work on music and I send music to folks to critique it, right? It's so important to get other people's feedback on what you're doing. And at the same time, if you're not really careful with managing the way you receive their feedback, it can feel bad. Yeah, because we do always have this, not, I shouldn't say we, I always have this tendency to wrap up my personal self-worth with the things I create. And it sounds like, you are trying to put into practice with or with the negation game, and also just in your personal life, right? You know, a proclivity to really challenge that, right? And to really what's the word? To become comfortable with hearing negative feedback, and just treating it as a exploration of this idea that's separate from who you are as a person. And maybe that's what you kind of meant when you questioned, like, well, wait, do you really need to believe in something to do it? It sounds like another way to frame this whole exploration of index wallets and the negation game with these invalidation sections. It's not that you believe in the idea necessarily. It's more that you think it would be fun to explore the idea, and maybe framing it in that sense, in a sense of like, hey, let's just play around and not worry too much. Maybe that's, a potential path forward, right? And maybe that's a good way to think about the negation game is, okay, let's drop, our egos at the door, and let's forget that, I'm from America and you're from China or whatever, right? And let's just like play around, maybe reframing it in that sense is because everybody likes to play, right? And everybody likes to explore. And I think that's one of the core joys of being human, right? So maybe there's something to all of that.
I love that. Yeah, I think I have a couple of notes of different paths to take from what you said. The curiosity one, like I do think that it's exciting to me to create an economic context where predominantly what you're pursuing is curiosity, because that is so freeing, right? It's less about me being committed to my ideas, and it's more about me committed to asking about the ideas, right? Asking the next question. I will say that it is working on this. Of course, like long before you make a product that exists in the world, you try the product on yourself, right? And you live kind of inside of its consequences. And I've noticed that there's this like peace or this like durability almost that comes from being the kind of person that's asking whether something is worth working on, rather than being the kind of person that's saying this is the thing that should be worked on.
Right.
There's this way in which it totally transforms your sense of security and safety, because now, like, instead of it being something that you're preciously guarding, it's something that like you've shown to the world, and it's kind of like it's taken a couple of hits, and you've learned that it's not as delicate or as fragile as you thought it was.
Sure.
And it's also the source of invitation. So many people then want to invite you in, because no longer are you this like hunched gargoyle, like with your thing that you're holding to your chest. But now you're able to enter into a space where like they know that you're not going to collide with something and snag on it or get shattered by it. And so it's this source of invitation, and it also allows them to have ownership of it too. It's so cool how when you are asking the question, is this something that should be done? That is something that people can take.
Totally.
And they can run with it. Whereas if you tell someone this is something that you should value, then
right,
they never have that same response to it.
And kind of returning to the venture capital story, maybe one way to frame all of that is to say that they were not, you talked about confidence being so important going into those meetings, right? It sounds like maybe there's not a lot of room in a venture capitalist meeting room. There's not a lot of space, rather, to have that same sense of, I don't know, I'm just open to the world, right? Which I agree is so important. And I think you know, makes one's life better in all sorts of ways and in all sorts of areas.
Yeah, I think so. Like one of the terms you'll hear. Well, let's see. Okay, so you said that like, is there an openness to exploring it? And I would point out that you should have some certainty, or you should have some, not certainty, but you should have some like expectation that what you're doing is actually worth doing. Because if you don't have this felt sense of expectation, it's actually really hard to motivate to do it. You definitely shouldn't be allocating capital to it. So there should be a sense of curiosity, but I don't think that curiosity is definitely in venture funding, curiosity is not the thing that's driving capital allocation. Instead, it's conviction. So you'll hear them frequently talk about how they're trying to build conviction, or they're conviction building, or they're trying to find conviction, or they're trying to be convicted as if they're like felons of some sort. This is something that they want to, and it comes from the fact that that this term conviction, as far as I can tell, arises from the fact that you have to, in venture funding, you're making fairly big bets over a very long time frame. And so in some sense you are convicted, right? You are put in a cell with some cellmates and you're going to be with them for a while. And so you really do have to have strong belief that this is something worth pursuing, because you're not running small experiments, you're running large and long-term experiments, and you're predominantly betting on the people and their ability to figure it out. And so conviction is kind of their language instead of curiosity. And I think that arises from the game context in which they're playing. So I think that there's game contexts that don't require that. I think that this mechanism in the negation game that gives small amounts of funding in exchange for saying how you can find out that you're wrong, where then that funding can be used to go and ask, basically, is this true? That does allow you to be more curiosity-driven instead of being conviction-driven.
Sure.
And so change the dynamics.
Yeah, but at the same time, what's so interesting is I believe at a certain point previously in this interview, you referred to the negation game as a potential alternative at the end of the day to venture capital, right? So here we're prioritizing this sense of curiosity and humility instead of a sense of assuredness and conviction, and yet it sounds like, you know, there's some argument saying that potentially this new process could do the same job of giving money away and deciding what's going to, or betting on what's going to succeed in the long run.
Yeah, and I think it can do it better, and I think it can do it for a larger class of problems. So right now, venture capital is about a $500 billion industry, $500 billion every year, and it predominantly funds projects that they reach some sort of enormous scale, and at that enormous scale, they can then take large revenues, which are then returned to holders of the shares. And the problem with VC is that it can only fund these sorts of for-profit endeavors, right? And so it can only fund, actually for-profit isn't quite the right term. It can only fund endeavors that actually result in people buying the ultimate product, right? It's monetized in some way. There's this class of problems, though, that's super valuable. The class of problems called basic research that are the source of so many of the things that we benefit from in the world today. You know, like the internet is something that comes out of basic research, and the Unix operating system comes out of basic research, and the telephone, maybe not the telephone. There's a long list of innovations that come from that. Cryptography, I think, and yet we don't have an economic system that's capable of natively funding it. We have an economic system that instead through taxes. Those taxes are taken to a government or sometimes to a research institution like a university, and then allocated to researchers so that they can go and pursue these things. There's no way for it to be directly profitable to work on some sort of basic research question. And what we're able to do in the negation game, because we can tie a token price to essentially like the credence or the credibility of an idea. As an idea grows in credence and credibility, the token price can rise as well, and that doesn't have to result. That doesn't rely on there being an ultimate revenue stream for that thing in the near term, and that's a really big deal because, for example, most research happening inside of big pharma. One of the reasons that pharma tends to have these like really large entities, research that pharma research happens inside of these really large entities, is because the process of doing basic research and then getting it all the way to market is really long and arduous and expensive. And so one person's like innovation, the mRNA vaccine, for example, where while it happens, maybe that's a controversial example, but I'm sure we can find others. While it happens, happens at some point inside of the organization, by the time it becomes useful and like you can deploy it to the world, maybe your patent has run out. Maybe it required 3 innovations, and then those other 2 innovations took a really long time to happen, or maybe they happened at another company, and so then like somehow those 2 like opportunities to work together doesn't exist. So huge inefficiency that happens that comes about from the patenting system there. By instead having basically you have a token that's associated with an idea, and the value of that token goes up as the sort of surface area for invalidation increases and it fails to be invalidated, and then that causes the token price to skyrocket. Now all of a sudden you can be an independent researcher working on your little research regime, and you can get that idea to the point of extreme plausibility, and it still has economic value. And so and then other people can go and use it, right? So you've gotten your payoff, and it's also in the open commons so that anyone else can use it. And so in the Joel Miller case, you create connection-oriented cluster matching, and bless you, Joel Miller creates connection-oriented cluster matching, and it begins to be used in all of these different places. Well, how do you profit from your innovation, right? It's there's no direct way that you benefit from it. Instead, what you get is you get some recognition in academia for the impact that you've had, and maybe that can result in you finding a stable position there. And then you get maybe employed by a couple of the organizations that use it. But off of the direct impact of you having this idea and this idea being valuable and used, you actually don't get any sort of extreme financial outcome. And what I'm excited about with the negation game is that you could.
Sure. Yes, that makes sense. I think that the one kind of I think a lot of what you said kind of pointed to this feature of markets, which is that hopefully they are able to accurately reflect the prices of they're hopefully able to accurately reflect the value of different things, right? So in the stock market, we hope that stock prices reflect the value of companies. In betting markets, we hope that stock prices reflect, or that bet prices, I suppose, reflect the probability that a certain thing will not happen or that will happen. And working at Gitcoin, where I'm employed part-time, it's so fascinating to me that they and many other Web3 organizations don't really have a solid revenue model. They really just mint their own token, and because people think that the company is interesting, they day trade the token, right? And so the price of their token just goes up. But they made up the token. They crafted it out of thin air. And And in one sense, that's absurd. And in another sense, it's really cool because that's kind of like this pure reflection. Like, I get to be paid by Gitcoin, like, just because people think Gitcoin is cool. And in some sense, that's like exactly the world I want to live in, right? So there's that part of prices and markets where it's really about valuing things correctly and giving the most attention to the coolest things. And I think especially though in betting markets, you kind of run into this other side of things where markets can also feel like a casino, right? And now actually you're not making as a single investor, you're not making decisions because it's in your best interest necessarily. You might be making investment decisions because it feels like you're gambling. And we know from human psychology that people gamble on low probability events all the time. They do irrational things all the time when gambling comes into play. And I think if you look at like Dogecoin or something like that, maybe there is some way to explain that in a perfectly rational framework, right? Where it's about people's rational desire to generate chaos or stick it to the man or something like that, right? But I think it also makes sense to view some of those decisions or some of the stuff that happened on Polymarket before the election as really a casino style event rather than like a rational probability, calculating style, frame of reference. So I think that that's like the kind of main thing that I worry about when it comes to, wanting to take all of these diverse considerations like the potential value of a basic research innovation and kind of plugging that in to a price in a market. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts, and even if you don't, I still think, I wish you the best with figuring all this stuff out.
I think you're right. Actually, I think that if we don't have a way to address that concern that you have, which is that markets don't do this naturally, then we're in big trouble. Because markets are, first of all, there's, at least with a public company, there is future cash flows, which kind of ground the value of the investment. Mm-hmm. Whereas with these... in the crypto world, when you create a new currency or a new token that people are then speculating on, like Dogecoin, the only thing that grounds the value of it is like, are other people going to buy it in the future? And that has a whole bunch of consequences. One of which is that the meme tokens win. So the things that somebody looks at and says other people are also going to buy this is what causes it to win. And at least right now, that means that the prevailing regime is that Dogecoin wins, and I can name some other. I don't want to give them a free airtime. There are other like meme tokens that win, sometimes explicitly because they are sort of inflammatory. Yeah. And that all comes, and there's nothing that grounds it, right? There's nothing that like says, okay, in this context, like the ones that we actually want to win are likely to win. And that I view as both a problem and an opportunity. Like basically all that we're saying is that there are strong Schelling points that determine whether or not certain things win. And at least right now, that those Schelling points are also constrained by basically like how much brand awareness can you have. They say like how there's only a certain number of like celebrities that you can even know about because you can only fit so many people inside of your head. The same is true for tokens. Is that you're only ever going to know, if you're like casually interested, you're only ever going to know maybe like 100 of them max. So that doesn't seem to offer us very much hope that like someone's synthetic meat biology project is likely, biotech project is likely to get much funding, right? And so that seems to point to two things. First, the first thing is that we have to somehow ensure that the token prices can go up even if they don't get attention, right? The token price can go up even if that particular token doesn't get attention from the broader world. That's the first thing. And that saves our researchers from having to become token marketers, right? They can kind of just focus on the game itself. The second thing is that the people who... The second thing is that if the game dynamics are set up so that the Schelling point is not over the things that are mimetic, but instead over the things that are substantial or epistemic, then that's where people are going to put their money, right? Because they're always just going to put their money where they think the highest returns are going to be. And so if we can move like this fact that in crypto you can just have all this money that appears out of thin air has a lot of people mad, right? They're like, clearly you should not be able to do that. And it has me so excited. It's like, okay, we've found a way to create money out of thin air, and we have a whole bunch of things that we want to be funded.
You're right.
What if we made money appear out of thin air for those things that we want to be funded, right?
Right, yeah. By the way, I should just briefly say for any listeners who don't know, a Schelling point, as you're using it, it really just refers to a point of coordination. So a Schelling point in this context is just everybody kind of being on the same page about what to do.
Yeah. Maybe Keynesian beauty contest is worth mentioning.
I don't think we should. At an hour and 40 minutes.
They're interested. They're here. They're still here at an hour and 40 minutes. I think they want to know.
I think at this point all our listeners probably actually don't need me to explain Schelling points if they've dealt
right.
with us for
if
this
they've made
long.
it this far, then they already know. They've passed the filter. Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, for all the true freaks still listening, I appreciate you sticking with us. I do think this is the time to wrap it up. Is there anything else that you want to say?
Yes. If you're interested in joining the Network Goods Institute Telegram chat group link, I'm going to share that with you, Joel, and then hopefully you can include that in the show notes.
Of course.
This is predominantly going to be a group focused on the mechanisms themselves. So if you listen to all this and you're like, okay, I hear what you're saying in concept, but I am a person who believes in substance, and you would like to come and spend time on calls talking about the mechanisms themselves and potentially also contributing to their design, then this would be a great place for you to get involved. And otherwise, you can find me on Farcaster as Nor, N-O-R, and you can find me on Twitter as incorrectly known as X, as Connor MCMK. Connor MCMK. Okay.
Excellent.
That was fun.
Connor, thank you so much for being on the show. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back in a year from now and you talk about turning down $50 million instead.
That's right. Let's see how much money we can turn down. That's the new metric.
All right.
Thank you, my friend.
All right.
Love you
Thank
much.
You.